They thought I was just some retired guy who'd roll over when they dropped a literal ton of concrete right across the entrance to my new ranch. I mean, I actually laughed, but that was a mistake because they had no earthly idea who they just tangled with. A retired civil engineer with maybe too much free time and definitely a well-stocked war chest, ready for a fight. When I bought their entire street out from under them and then tripled their monthly dues just for good measure, the look on Vivian Sterling's face, honestly, it turned whiter than the stucco on her precious little Mediterranean villa. But look, that was only the appetizer, just the start of the full-course revenge I had planned for the queen of Whisper Rock Preserve. Grab your coffee, pull up a chair, and brace yourself, because this is the story of the extreme payback delivered by a mild-mannered man who was pushed so far past his breaking point, he found a whole new continent of anger. After 3 decades spent navigating the absolute maze that is real estate development, the permits, the zoning battles, the endless bureaucratic nonsense, my wife Nora and I had finally found our dream. We bought this absolutely beautiful 5-acre ranch property, sitting just outside the boundary of Whisper Rock Preserve, this exclusive, ridiculously upscale suburban development here in Colorado. We're talking mountain views, a charming old farmhouse, and most importantly, the sweetest, most glorious kind of freedom. No HOA oversight. We'd worked hard our whole lives, Nora as a razor-sharp corporate counsel, me in the trenches of construction, and this ranch. This was supposed to be our reward, our last chapter, the quiet one. Our very first project, even before we unpacked the last box, was replacing the existing gate. It was this sad, rusty, chain-link monstrosity, and we wanted something fitting for a real property. A gorgeous, robust wooden ranch gate with stone columns on either side. Nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious, just tasteful and well-built, you know? Like everything else we planned for our retirement. We got the contractors lined up, the permits pulled, and work began. Everything was smooth sailing, calm waters, or so we thought. Then came the morning, everything changed. I went out, coffee in hand, anticipating the smell of fresh lumber, maybe a gentle sunrise over the Rockies, and instead I stopped dead. Right there, directly in front of our half-finished entrance, was this colossal concrete road barrier, easily weighing a couple of tons, completely, maliciously blocking any access to our land. Next to it was this ridiculously officious-looking notice, big Whisper Rock Preserve Homeowners Association logo right at the top, stating in bold, red lettering that our gate construction was in flagrant violation of community aesthetic guidelines and must be immediately discontinued. I stood there just absolutely bewildered. Our property wasn't even part of Whisper Rock. That was the whole point of buying the parcel next door. We had meticulously verified that before closing. I immediately called Nora, who arrived faster than I could hang up the phone, as we were just staring at this giant, gray insult, wondering if we should call the county or maybe just rent a tank, a black luxury SUV, something ridiculously clean and enormous, pulled up beside us. Out stepped this woman, Vivian Sterling. Early 60s, immaculate blonde bob, designer clothes that screamed, "I have opinions about your lawn furniture." She approached us with the absolute, unshakable confidence of someone who has never, ever been told no. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she announced, not bothering with something as vulgar as a greeting. "I see you've received our notice regarding your rustic construction project." The way she spat out the word rustic made it sound like I was building a swamp shack out of used tires. I took a deep, centering breath, years of business negotiation kicking in. "Ms. Sterling, there has to be a misunderstanding." I tried, keeping my voice level. "Our property is independent. It's not part of the preserve. We confirm this." Vivian's smile didn't move, not an inch, but her eyes hardened, turning to polished granite. "The property may not be, Mr. Hayes, but the access road certainly is. Check your paperwork." She had me there instantly. She continued, oozing disdain, "Maple Crest Drive belongs to our community, and we have full authority over any structure visible from it. Your farm entrance is an eyesore that will absolutely diminish property values in our prestigious enclave." Before I could even form a response, She slapped a formal cease and desist order into my hand. This has been approved by the board. I suggest you comply immediately to avoid further costly complications. We have excellent relationships with the county, you know. And with that, she strode back to her SUV, leaving me standing there, the papers slowly crumpling in my grip. Nora, always the attorney, was already reviewing the document before Vivian's taillights vanished. "Cal," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, "she might be right about the road. We need to hit the property records, and we need to do it now." I nodded, still staring at the concrete monstrosity. 30 years in development told me that property line disputes were always messy, but this felt less like a dispute and more like a declaration of war. A power move by someone used to crushing opposition beneath their immaculately styled heel. What Vivian Sterling didn't grasp was that she hadn't just picked a fight. She'd picked a highly specialized demolition contractor. As we walked the long way around to get back to our house, thankfully, our neighbor, a friendly former Marine named Jim, hated the HOA even more than we did and let us use his driveway. The next morning, I was up before the Colorado sun, the dining room table buried under property deeds, surveys, and legal documents. Nora, fueled by coffee and righteous anger, joined me. By noon, the picture was painfully clear, and just as Vivian had gloated, our ranch parcel was indeed outside the HOA's direct jurisdiction, but the short strip of pavement, Maple Crest Drive, that connected our entrance to the main highway technically fell inside the preserved boundaries. It was a stupid, tiny technical oversight from the original developer years ago, one that had failed to properly record our access easement when our land was subdivided. And Vivian, God bless her meticulous soul, had found it and was now weaponizing it. "This is absurd," Nora vented, slamming a thick stack of papers down. "They can't just block access. There are laws, easement by necessity, right-of-ways." I knew she was right, but I also knew that fighting this through the traditional, agonizingly slow legal channels could take years. And for years, we would be subject to Vivian's petty, vindictive whims. We needed specialized help, someone who understood how the HOA game was rigged. That afternoon, we contacted Dr. Lena Sharma, a brilliant real estate attorney known locally for being the absolute bane of predatory HOAs. Lena arrived precisely on time, petite, but carrying this electric, almost intense focus. "Tell me everything," she said, as we sat on our back porch, forced to look at our mountain view from the back because the front gate remained barricaded. We laid out the situation, the concrete, Vivian's arrogance. Lena took notes, only interrupting with the sharpest, most precise questions, slicing through our rambling frustration. When we finished, she sat back, thoughtful. "The HOA is technically correct about the road's boundary, but they are grossly, illegally overstepping by blocking your actual access. That's trespass. However, direct litigation is what they want. They have deep pockets, and they can drag you through the courts until you simply give up." Then, she asked the question that changed the entire playing field. It sounded so simple, so deceptively mild. "Have you looked into who actually owns the road itself?" I frowned. "The HOA does, right?" Vivian said so. Lena smiled, and it wasn't a lawyer's smile. It was the look of a mischief maker. "Not necessarily, Cal. HOAs often manage the roads through a management agreement, but they don't always hold the deed. If the original developer went under, ownership can get messy." She pulled out her laptop, showed us how to access the obscure corners of the county property records, and together, we spent the next agonizing hours digging through digital dust, following a paper trail that had been forgotten by time. What we unearthed was utterly astonishing. Maple Crest Drive had, in fact, never been properly transferred to the HOA. The original developer, Mesa Verde Developments, had collapsed during the 2008 crash. While most community assets have been assigned to the new Homeowners Association, a few odd parcels, including our access road, have been swept up and acquired by a holding company during the bankruptcy proceedings. This company, Taurus Assets LLC, was a completely passive investment entity and almost certainly had no idea they owned a small 200-yard strip of asphalt in suburban Colorado. So, the HOA doesn't actually own the street they're using to block us? I asked slowly, the implications expanding like a supernova in my mind. Lena's smile spread, turning genuinely wicked. Ownership? No. They likely have a management agreement to plow and repair it, but the deed is held by a shell company that probably hasn't thought about this road in 15 years. She leaned forward. And here's where being a civil engineer with business sense pays off. Taurus Assets has been dormant. They pay the minimal property taxes automatically, but they might be very open to selling this completely non-performing administrative overhead asset. Nora, Lena, and I looked at each other, the same thrilling, slightly terrifying thought forming simultaneously. What if I bought the road? I asked. Could I actually just do that? Lena's smile widened further, the hunt clearly in her eyes. Let's make some calls, Cal, and let's not tell Vivian anything. While we began processing this colossal revelation, Vivian and her cronies, completely unaware of the bomb that was ticking beneath their manicured community, decided to pay us another visit. This time, she brought Gary Denton, the HOA's vice president, a thick-necked, overfed man in his 60s, sporting a golf shirt that was fighting for its life against his belly, and a Rolex he made sure was flashing with every exaggerated gesture. The board has reviewed your situation, Vivian announced without preamble. We'll take your suggestions under advisement. I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The moment they were gone, Nora turned to me, her eyes blazing. Cal, you need to call Taurus Assets immediately, before that woman pushes me to commit a felony. While Lena worked her contacts to get us to the right people at Taurus, we started compiling a detailed file on the HOA itself. Our neighbor Jim, the former Marine, was an invaluable asset, introducing us to other residents who'd clashed with Vivian's dictatorial reign. The stories were all identical: arbitrary rule enforcement, selective targeting, and an atmosphere of institutional intimidation. More disturbingly, there were whispers of financial misconduct. The landscape budget doubled last year, one older resident told us confidentially, but they cut back on watering and half the community's trees died. Nobody knows where the extra $40,000 went. We documented everything, building a dossier that went far beyond our simple gate. Lena summed it up perfectly, tapping the folder on our dining table. Cal, do you know what happens when HOA administrators discover they no longer control the road that provides access to all their homes? I gave her a tight, hard smile. No, Lena, but I'm certainly going to enjoy finding out. Contacting Taurus Assets turned out to be surprisingly straightforward, thanks to an old college connection who now manage their dormant investment portfolio. Maple Crest Drive? Yeah, that dusty little parcel, he said during our call. It's been sitting on the books for years. Minimal taxes, but honestly, it's just pure administrative overhead for us. We'd be happy to offload it. I kept my explanation vague. Just a property owner looking to secure permanent, uninterrupted access to my own land, and was meticulous about never hinting at the road's true, immense strategic value. After a surprisingly brief negotiation, we settled on a price that was, frankly, insulting to the HOA, but a godsend to us. Taurus Assets was simply thrilled to monetize a non-performing line item. While the paperwork crawled through the gears of bureaucracy, Vivian and her miniature VP intensified their campaign against us. Every day brought some new, utterly preposterous notice of alleged violation. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of brown. The color of our window trim was unapproved. Even the native Colorado wildflowers Nora had planted were deemed inappropriate vegetation. Gary Denton took a particular, sickening pleasure in delivering these notices himself, always with that same condescending, smug smirk. We documented every single notice, every interaction, following Lena's advice. Let them think they're winning, Cal, she insisted. The element of surprise is your ultimate weapon here. Meanwhile, Nora, in her element, used her corporate counsel skills to peel back the HOA's bylaws. She discovered that Vivian had been serving as president for 8 consecutive years, despite the bylaws clearly limiting the term to 3 years. The loophole was buried in old meeting minutes, an emergency extension during the pandemic that they simply never bothered to rescind. More damning were the financial discrepancies. The HOA's reserve fund showed significant, unexplained withdrawals that conveniently coincided with Vivian's complete kitchen remodel and Gary's shiny new fishing boat purchase. Nothing was proven yet, but the pattern was a screaming red flag. The weeks dragged on, the concrete block mocking us every time we had to take the long, humiliating way around through Jim's driveway. Jim, bless his heart, had now become a target too, simply for being our friend. He received a violation notice for his American flag display, allegedly too large, despite the exact same flag being displayed by 3 of Vivian's closest neighbors. "They do this for sport, Cal," Jim told us one evening, sharing a whiskey on his porch. "They find some minor rule, and they use it to make your life hell until you fall in line. Most folks just pack up and move." He took a deep breath, his expression turning hard. "But I'm not moving. This was my father's house. I'll be damned if I let some power-drunk busybody run me out." Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity of bureaucratic molasses, the call came from Lena. "Congratulations, Cal," her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "You are now the proud owner of approximately 700 feet of perfectly good asphalt, legally known as Maple Crest Drive." A tidal wave of triumphant relief washed over me as I signed the final documents that afternoon. We agreed to keep the purchase a complete secret for just a few days more, while Lena prepared the formal legal notification. Driving home that evening, taking the long way around for the very last time, a thrilling, almost adolescent excitement surged through me. Vivian Sterling had been busy with her petty, small-stakes harassment campaign, completely missing the fact that I had just quietly walked away with the single most valuable chess piece on the board. The next morning, Lena arrived, carrying a thick stack of official-looking documents and a truly magnificent grin. "These are the formal notices," she explained, sliding the documents across our counter. "They inform the Whisper Rock Preserve HOA that ownership of their access road has legally changed hands. And this," she added, pulling out a second, shorter letter, "is the outline of the new access agreement they will need to sign if they wish to continue using my client's private property." The terms were completely reasonable, but utterly uncompromising. The HOA would need to formally acknowledge our right of access to our ranch, remove any and all barriers immediately, and agree to a monthly maintenance fee, a fee that, purely coincidentally, amounted to exactly 3 times their current, already high HOA dues. "Is this legal?" Nora asked, though her eyes were twinkling with barely contained glee. Lena nodded, completely confident. "Absolutely. As the new property owner, Cal has every single legal right to establish the terms of use for his private road. They can negotiate, of course, but their legal position, as of this morning, is essentially rubble." We decided that I would deliver the documents personally the following evening, right during the HOA's monthly board meeting. That night, as we planned our entrance, we received an unexpected visitor, Marcus Allen, the city clerk. Jim had introduced us previously, noting that Marcus was one of the few city officials who hadn't been charmed or, more accurately, intimidated by Vivian Sterling. "Heard through the municipal grapevine you acquired the Maple Crest property," he said, declining a cup of coffee. He paused, looking around. "Just thought you should know that Ms. Sterling has been ringing every department this afternoon, trying to find a way to challenge any change in ownership." His expression remained neutral, but there was a palpable hint of satisfaction in his voice. Of course, property transactions that follow proper legal procedure are fully recognized by the city, Mr. Hayes, regardless of who might object. I thanked him, and that little piece of information, Vivian was already scrambling, was sweeter than any victory speech. The next evening, I suited up. Not the flashiest suit, but the one that projected the most measured, unflappable authority. Lena accompanied me to the HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse, and we waited silently at the back of the room. I watched Vivian run through the agenda, watching her arbitrarily rubber stamp requests from her allies and dismiss others with barely concealed contempt. Finally, during the new business segment, I raised my hand. Vivian's face instantly curdled the moment she saw me. "Mr. Hayes," she drawled dismissively. This meeting is for Whisper Rock residents only. Since you have made it abundantly clear that your property is not part of our community, you have no business here. I smiled, a genuine, pleasant, predatory smile, as I stood up. Actually, Miss Sterling, I have a great deal of business here. I paused, letting the silence hang, letting every eye turn to me. As of yesterday morning, I am the legal owner of Maple Crest Drive, the road that provides primary access to every single home in this community. A gasp ripped through the room. Patricia's face, already pale from her phone calls to the city, froze in total, utter disbelief. That's impossible, she sputtered, her voice high and thin. The road belongs to the association. Lena stepped forward then, calm, professional, and deadly, handing copies of the recorded property deed and transfer documents to each board member. I'm afraid Mr. Hayes is correct, she said, cutting through the rising panic. The road was never properly transferred to the HOA after the developer's bankruptcy 15 years ago. It has been owned by Taurus Assets for that entire time, and as of yesterday, legal ownership has been transferred entirely to Mr. Hayes. The room absolutely detonated. Gary Dennon's face turned a horrifying shade of purple as he started shouting about lawsuits and injunctions. Vivian desperately hammered her gavel, demanding silence, but the residents were ignoring her, bombarding us with questions. Lena handled them with masterful ease, calmly explaining what this meant for the community. I watched Vivian and Gary exchange panicked glances, realizing with stomach-lurching certainty how completely, fundamentally, the tables had just been overturned. Finally, Vivian managed to adjourn the meeting in total chaos, announcing that the board would, of course, be reviewing the situation with their attorneys. As people filed out, some cast worried, angry glances our way, while others, the ones who had suffered under Vivian's petty dictatorship, seemed to be barely suppressing triumphant, relieved smiles. When Nora and I got back to the ranch that night, I poured myself a serious glass of bourbon and settled down to watch the security footage. Jim, our neighbor, had the foresight to set up a camera pointing right into the clubhouse parking lot. I watched Vivian Sterling, looking like a poorly preserved porcelain doll, nearly screaming at the remaining board members, while Gary paced anxiously, repeatedly checking his phone, his golf shirt straining to contain his panic. The storm they had dismissed so casually was now starting to form, and I, the mild-mannered man they'd tried to wall off, was now the one controlling the weather. The next morning, I wasted no time. I hired a local excavating contractor. Vivian must have been keeping a close watch on our entrance because she appeared within minutes, Gary and two maintenance guys from the preserve trailing miserably behind her. "Stop this immediately," she shrieked, actually stepping right in front of the excavator's bucket. "You have absolutely no authority to modify HOA property." I didn't argue. I simply walked over and handed her a fresh copy of the deed, highlighting my name at the top. "This isn't HOA property anymore, Ms. Sterling. It's my property, and I am removing an unauthorized obstruction from it." She snatched the paper, her face a mask of contorted fury. "This changes nothing. Our attorneys will overturn this trickery." But she was forced to stand aside, jaw tight, as the massive concrete block was lifted, moved, and finally dropped unceremoniously into the back of a waiting flatbed truck. That afternoon, Lena delivered the official road usage agreement to the HOA office, complete with the very first invoice for road access fees. I had deliberately set the amount, as promised, at exactly 3 times the monthly dues that Whisper Rock residents were accustomed to paying. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of poetic justice that Lena openly admired. "They'll fight this, Cal," she warned. "Vivian is way too much ego invested to back down easily." She was right, of course. By the evening, the HOA's expensive Denver attorney had contacted Lena, flatly rejecting our terms and threatening immediate litigation. Even more desperately, Vivian had ordered the maintenance crew to place an even larger concrete block, an almost comical one, in front of our gate, a futile, pathetic gesture that only strengthened our legal position in the eyes of any neutral observer. The next day, I took another step that was designed to bring the situation to a head, forcing the residents to confront the new reality. I had professional, tasteful signage installed at both entrances to Maple Crest Drive. Large, clear letters, private road, access by permission only. And below, in smaller, polite print, for access permits, contact Hayes Properties LLC. The signs were discreet, tasteful, far more elegant than they legally needed to be, but their message was a physical, public, and unmistakable declaration of the power shift. That night, exactly as I suspected, someone tried to vandalize them. The security footage I'd installed along the road clearly showed Gary Denton, in person, personally kicking over one sign and desperately trying to uproot the other, giving up only when he realized his immense bulk wasn't enough to pry it out of the new concrete footing. The community was now in a true uproar. Lena's phone was ringing constantly with calls from genuinely worried residents who had suddenly grasped the terrifying reality. Their million-dollar homes were now accessible only via a private road they had no legal right to use, owned by the very man their HOA president had antagonized. Vivian, now desperate, hastily called another HOA meeting. This time, instead of the usual handful of disgruntled attendees, nearly every single household was represented. We chose not to attend, simply letting the pressure build. Jim, our neighbor, reported back. Vivian tried to reassure everyone that it was just a temporary legal confusion, and their attorneys would quickly resolve this misunderstanding. But the residents weren't buying the propaganda anymore. They wanted to know how the board had allowed this massive oversight to happen, where the road maintenance fees they'd been paying for years had actually gone, and, most urgently, if they were genuinely at risk of being locked out of their own driveways. The following morning, I filed a formal police report regarding the vandalism of my property, providing crystal clear video evidence of Gary Denton's pathetic tantrum. By the afternoon, he had received a visit from the local police and a citation for criminal mischief. It was a minor charge, yes, but the sheer humiliation of having the police show up at his immaculate home was exactly the kind of public embarrassment that someone like Gary, so dependent on status and appearances, would find utterly intolerable. Meanwhile, Nora continued her meticulous excavation of the HOA's finances, turning up even more damning evidence of mismanagement and potential fraud. When Gary had arrogantly walked away after kicking down my sign, he didn't know his actions had been perfectly recorded from 3 different angles. Sometimes the best enemy is the one who is overconfident, blinded by their own arrogance. With Gary facing a criminal charge, however minor, and our ownership of Maple Crest Drive firmly established, the entire dynamic of the conflict began to shift seismically. Vivian tried to rally the community against us, sending out a community-wide email portraying us as vindictive outsiders, trying to extort honest homeowners. Her efforts backfired spectacularly when Nora responded with a calm, point-by-point rebuttal, copying all residents, and including documentation of how we had been treated from the very beginning. Most damaging to Vivian was the question Nora raised about the HOA's financial stewardship. Specifically, Nora wrote, "How have residents' dues been spent on road maintenance for a road the HOA didn't actually own for the last 15 years? If the board was genuinely unaware of this discrepancy, it demonstrates profound incompetence. If they were aware, it raises far more troubling, potentially criminal questions." I decided to turn the pressure up another notch. I implemented a formal parking permit system for Maple Crest Drive. Any vehicle parked along the roadside without a permit would be subject to immediate towing at the owner's expense. This directly challenged one of Vivian's favorite petty enforcement tactics. She routinely had guest cars towed if they parked on the street overnight, citing HOA regulations. Now, those regulations were utterly meaningless as I, not the HOA, controlled the parking rights on the road. I made sure the first round of permits were issued free of charge to all residents, except the board members, who would have to apply separately via a lengthy, bureaucratic form I personally designed. It was petty, yes, but it made the power shift concrete in a way everyone could understand and feel. The community visibly began to fracture. Many residents, particularly those who had clashed with Vivian in the past, started to openly support us. Jim became a natural spokesman for this growing faction, unafraid to challenge the board publicly. The HOA hired an even more expensive lawyer from a different firm, but even he seemed uncertain of their legal standing, quietly advising them to consider negotiation over disastrous, protracted litigation. Vivian rejected this advice instantly, convinced her political connections would somehow prevail. The pressure continued to mount when I installed a temporary, automated traffic barrier at the entrance to Maple Crest Drive, requiring residents to use a key card for access. I immediately distributed free key cards to all households except the board members. When Vivian called me, absolutely apoplectic with rage, demanding immediate access, I calmly explained that board members could submit their access applications through the proper channels, just as they had required me to do for every single minor adjustment to our property. "You can't do this," she sputtered through the phone. "People need to get to their homes." I replied, using the exact same patronizing tone and phrase she had used on me weeks earlier. "I'm simply enforcing reasonable standards, Ms. Sterling, to maintain community values. I'm sure you understand the importance of following proper procedures." The dead, shocked silence on the other end of the line was the deepest, most satisfying sound I had heard in months. The situation escalated further when several of Vivian's closest allies on the board found their monthly water bills had mysteriously tripled. It turned out the water company had been accessing meters via an easement that ran along Maple Crest Drive, and without proper permits from Hayes Properties LLC, they were now being charged commercial access fees rather than standard utility rates. I hadn't planned this specific complication, but I certainly didn't rush to resolve it either. The affected board members were forced to publicly and formally request my assistance, a deeply humbling experience for people who had been treating my family like unwelcome intruders for months. I graciously resolved the utility issue, but only after they submitted formal written apologies for their past treatment of Nora and me. As tensions reached a fever pitch, Jim organized a group of residents to research the HOA's historical records. What they uncovered was deeply alarming. Years of selective enforcement against specific homeowners, financial discrepancies that screamed embezzlement at worst, and executive session minutes revealing Vivian's explicit strategy to target anyone who challenged her authority. "She's been running this place like a petty little town dictator, Cal," Jim told me over coffee one morning, sliding a folder across the table. "And people are finally waking up." Things came to a head at an emergency community meeting called not by the board, but by the residents themselves. The clubhouse couldn't hold the crowd, so the meeting was moved to the local high school gymnasium. Nora and I took seats quietly in the back, feeling the thick electric tension in the air. This was the reckoning. Vivian arrived last, her flawless appearance now showing clear signs of strain, her smile tight and brittle. The current board treasurer, visibly sweating, presented the evidence of financial discrepancies that had now been independently verified by an accountant hired by the concerned residents. Vivian's defense was predictable, a desperate, rambling tirade characterizing the entire investigation as a witch hunt orchestrated by outsiders, meaning us, and suggesting any financial problems were mere bookkeeping errors. "I have given 8 years of my life to this community," she declared, her voice rising to a shaky crescendo. "I have maintained property values while the rest of the county declined. And this is the thanks I get? Accusations from people who don't even live here." It might have been a compelling performance if Gary Denon hadn't chosen that exact moment to walk into the gymnasium, accompanied by an actual, uniformed police detective. The investigation into the HOA's finances was now officially criminal, and Gary's plea deal required his full, immediate cooperation. What followed was the climax, both dramatic and deeply satisfying. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories. An elderly couple fined repeatedly for a necessary wheelchair ramp that violated the HOA's aesthetic standards. A young family threatened with litigation for installing an autism-friendly sensory garden for their child. Jim, with his military bearing, detailed the systematic, documented targeting of anyone who ever challenged Vivian. Through it all, Vivian sat rigidly, her expression hardening, her support visibly eroding with every painful, honest testimony. When it came time to vote, the outcome was overwhelming. Vivian and the entire implicated board were instantly removed from their positions. The community also voted overwhelmingly to accept our proposed road access agreement, finally acknowledging our ownership rights while securing their own access needs. Then, I stood up again. As a gesture of goodwill, I announced that I would consider transferring ownership of Maple Crest Drive back to the community, not the old HOA, but to a community trust under specific ironclad conditions that would protect all parties, including our own unhindered access in perpetuity. This unexpected offer completely changed the atmosphere in the room, shifting it from vindictive satisfaction to cautious, hopeful optimism about a truly collaborative future. Vivian, unable to handle her defeat with even a shred of dignity, stormed out of the gymnasium, managing one final, empty threat. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys. You can't destroy someone's reputation like this." But honestly, no one even turned to watch her leave. They were too busy listening to the vision of a community that could truly become a place where people wanted to live, not a place they feared. Over the next few weeks, Whisper Rock Preserve underwent a remarkable transformation. With Vivian and her cronies gone, residents began to genuinely engage with community governance. I provided guidance only when asked, staying in the background, allowing the healing to happen organically. True to my word, I drafted an agreement to transfer ownership of Maple Crest Drive back to the new community trust, with binding covenants requiring a 75% approval majority for any access changes, ensuring the road could never again be used as a weapon. Vivian tried to make good on her legal threat, filing a completely baseless defamation suit against Nora, Jim, and me. Her case was DOA, and her own attorneys quickly withdrew after reviewing the financial evidence. Within months, she quietly dropped the lawsuit and put her ridiculously pretentious villa on the market, unwilling to face her former neighbors. Gary Denon had already vanished, selling his home at a significant loss just to escape the whispers. As spring turned to summer, Nora and I finally completed the ranch gate that had started this entire absurd conflict. It was exactly as we had planned: beautiful, tasteful, appropriate for a ranch, and sitting entirely on our own land. We held a small celebration, inviting the neighbors who had stood by us, Jim, Marcus, the families who had suffered. It felt like the community gathering that Whisper Rock should have been all along. The concrete block, that initial instrument of war, now sits repurposed as a beautiful, small fountain right at the entrance to the new community center, with a discreet plaque that reads, "Dedicated to the Whisper Rock community." It's never too late to do the right thing. No one truly understands its full significance except those of us who live through the conflict, and that, perhaps, is the sweetest victory of all. Last week, I ran into Vivian at the local supermarket. She saw me, quickly turned her cart around, and hurried down the pasta aisle, completely unable to meet my eyes. I simply nodded politely and continued my shopping. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemy, but simply living well, living free, after the dust has settled. The new leadership of the Preserve has actually invited me to serve as an advisor on their planning committee. The irony is not lost on anyone. I accepted because I believe my experience can genuinely help the community avoid the toxicity of the past. When someone asked me why I didn't just give up when they blocked my gate, I gave them the only answer that matters, because principles matter. When someone tries to bully you off your own property, using rules they clearly invented, standing firm isn't just about your rights. It's about ensuring they can't do the same to someone else tomorrow. Nora and I finally have the peaceful retirement we planned for. Our ranch is thriving, and every single time I drive through our beautiful wooden gate, I'm reminded that bullies rely on people backing down, counting on you deciding the fight isn't worth the trouble. Many battles aren't worth fighting, that's true, but occasionally you encounter one that matters far beyond the immediate issue. When that happens, standing your ground isn't stubbornness, it's necessary. And if you happen to have the knowledge, the resources, and the sheer determination to completely turn the tables on them, Well, that's just pure, satisfying American justice. The HOA that blocked my gate never knew they were picking a fight with someone who had the exact skill set and temperament to dismantle their little kingdom. By trying to assert control over my property, they lost complete control of their own. And in the end, everyone, except the ones who abused their power, ended up better off. I call that a happy ending worth fighting for. So, tell me, have you ever dealt with a controlling HOA or a difficult neighbor? What's the most ridiculous or absurd rule you've ever encountered in a community? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about where the line is between community standards and absolute tyranny. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next time someone tries to mess with the wrong retired guy.